You are listening to Spotlight Sessions with Justin Bamforth. The program provides an inside look at the creative field through exclusive conversations with industry professionals. Every episode is recorded live each month in the Adobe Creative Career Discord. Check out the show links to learn more and join for free, or visit adobediscord.com and click on Adobe Creative Career. This episode was previously recorded before a live listening audience. Sneha Shanker is a South Asian illustrator and designer based in London, where her dreamy creations are home to empowered women in vibrant palettes. Rooted in culture and shaped by global influences, she explores these types of transcendental experiences through themes of style, health, and well-being for some of the most recognizable clients worldwide. Clients that include Vans, HarperCollins, Lush, The Guardian, and the BBC, just to mention a few of them. But tonight, she is here to talk about what life is really like for a creative beyond the clichés. Sneha, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Justin and Catherine.
Yes. Well, look, you've been in this field for a while doing illustration work and design, but what's something about working in the creative industry that surprised you once you were actually in it?
It's whenever you want to enter a new industry, you always starry-eyed. You're always amazed by what could happen. And I think that's a good way of looking at an industry, and especially the creative industry. But something that caught me off guard when I was new to this is how tough it is to actually break through. I think as somebody who hasn't gone to an art school, like I studied design a bit later, but I didn't study illustration particularly. So, we haven't had visits from art directors who were like seeing our work, giving us work, as in which happens a lot in New York and I think in MICA, Maryland College. A lot of art directors just like get people off the bat and start giving them work. And that did not happen for me because I didn't study illustration. So it is a bit of a barrier for new people who are not of the background to break into the industry. And I think that was a bit surprising. Like, oh, there is this new hurdle that I got across now.
In your opinion, is it really important for formal education for today's creatives? Or are there other ways that somebody can acquire those skills and those talents?
Here's where I think answers could be a bit varied, because it totally depends on what a person is seeking from, say, a design or an art education versus what if you're actually just looking to get better within your skills, then there's plenty of tutorials online. Is what I would say. You could learn how different softwares work on YouTube, or there are these course providers online. With a simple Google search, you would find a lot of them. But I think what design schools and art schools provide is a bit different than all of that. I will speak from my experience in design school is that a person gets to live and study the same things around people who like and share the same things. And I think it also gives a sense of a critical eye from other people's perspectives as you work on your design and art projects, which it could be a solitary journey if you're doing it by yourself and learning online by yourself. Another thing that I feel that art and design schools give is that they give you, I would say, a senior's perspective of what your work could look like, and how could it potentially fit into the industry. This provided you go to an art school or a design school which has this sort of a background that it provides all of these facilities. But I think it is in some ways good to go to a design or an art school.
When you were in design school, did you learn most of your illustration skills within the school, like within some of the courses, or did you acquire a lot of that outside of the school?
So I learned nothing within the illustration industry in design school. We probably had like a single credit course on how to use Photoshop or something of the sort, but I learned nothing.
Wow. Well, then how did you what drew you to the illustration world? You know, like if you didn't have that exposure to it, what was it that kind of like that brought you in?
I think what started happening was as and when we started getting design projects like, say branding or say packaging, um, signage design, and a lot of different projects. What I started observing was I was adding illustrations to those projects as a part of my project. Like I was adding illustrations onto packaging, adding illustration on a branding project. And this was something that I enjoyed doing in the process. Eventually, when I got out of my design school, I continued this whole adding illustration onto my commissions, which were design commissions, by the way. I was not being paid for doing any illustration on those. It was just like, I like doing this. I'm going to give this to you for free, kind of a thing. Um, so I kept doing this, and then I eventually realized enough of doing this for free, and I should just focus on this and start to pivot towards an industry that I'm more interested in. So that's where the change happened over time.
Interesting. So you mentioned doing like work basically for free. Do you think that that's like a good way to kind of like get that experience, but also to kind of build that portfolio out so that you can show people, hey, look, even though I don't have any quote unquote real world experience, I have been doing these pro bono projects. And it's just a way to kind of like, to basically build up your portfolio.
I'm laughing because I genuinely didn't know I was doing work for free as I was doing all of this.
Oh, okay.
I, nobody was asking me to do all of this, Justin. They were looking for a design solution, and it was my way of providing illustration as a part of the design solution. So technically, it was not free work. I was charging them for the design job. But my stance on free work is not quite the same. I don't think people should do free work. Um, Pro bono, in the sense, I think it's a good thing to do passion projects if you want to show off your skills. I think passion projects are a great way to maybe, put a little foot in a new sort of a genre. Oh, I've never done book cover designs. Let me try out how my work would look on a book cover. Let me design a little logo. But yeah, probably a pro bono in the sense that yeah, there's a cafe around the corner who might not have the resources, so I could yeah do it for them for really cheap and also get a nice project in my portfolio. I think yeah, that could be done. But I think it always depends on how big the client is, and if they, there's so many factors that pricing depends on. So I don't think people should technically do work for free. But I think in the beginning of your career, a few projects here and there when you want to add stuff to your portfolio, and if you find clients who you think your values align with, then probably not for free, but like below the industry standard, I think you could go.
Well, all right. So let me ask you this because I'm looking at your LinkedIn and I'm looking at your work history, and you spent a lot of time working for companies in India, but then you found yourself in London. And what initially drew you to London? Was it always somewhere you pictured yourself living, or did life take you there in an unexpected way?
Before we moved to London, I had never imagined living in London. I had never dreamt of living in London. And life honestly just brought me here. My partner worked for a company back in India who wanted him to move either to the US or to the UK in London because he handled a lot of clients here. So that's how we both ended up here. And at that point in time, I was ready for a change. I was in India. I was working for this small brand company, which was basically doing a lot of design work in house, and I was ready for a change back then. This was about 6 or 7 years ago, And I was ready to jump into illustration full time rather than doing it on the side, which is what I was doing along with design um, back in India.
Were you nervous? Were you scared kind of, to make that leap from, having like a stable company to support you to now all of a sudden you're doing it on your own?
100%. This was such a different thing overall overall in itself, because it was not just a new industry, it was a completely different continent and a different country where I knew no one, and I had to start everything from scratch. Having no network, having no friends, having no said colleagues, which basically my partner had, but I didn't have anyone. So it was nerve wracking, but it felt like it was the right time to do something.
Going from like basically a zero network to now, having all these incredible clients, like what was the progress like for that? How did you attract some of these big name companies? Because that's not the norm there. How did you do that?
Yeah, honestly, now that I think about it, and back when I moved from India, there weren't a lot of, even now, there's illustration isn't really a big industry in India. Um, it has gotten much better. It is design and illustration has come much further than what I saw last when I was there. But back then, I was I was getting paid in India for like a single editorial illustration 30 quid, which is basically like $50, which is absolute, like, even in the Indian currency, it is really bad. So it wouldn't have been feasible for me to work in the Indian illustration industry, whatever that was back then. So design was financially more feasible, uh, to live in a tier one city in India and to like financially sustain myself. Design was a much better option. But after moving here, illustration obviously is much bigger in the UK and in the US, and people can have a good career if they choose to do either of these things in the West. So I think it was good timing in that sense. And about your question of attracting bigger clients, what happened once I moved here was that I did not have a job and I did not want to apply for a job. I had made up my mind that this is something that I was going to do, and I had also had some savings by then, which allowed me to focus. I gave myself like a few months to build up my portfolio. I drew like there was no tomorrow. I did not take any weekends off. I was one of those loners who had no friends and who would just draw. I knew I had to get better, and there was no other way. I did not have a plan B. So I had to rely on getting better at my skills, networking. When we say networking, there is an event that happens almost on the daily here in London. So I really tapped into that. I would go and meet people all the time, and it was nerve wracking initially. But then right now, I could literally walk up to anyone and strike a conversation. I've got so good at that. And yeah, initially it was so tough. Mm, But then, yeah, a little bit of networking, building up my portfolio, and then cold outreach. All of this combined, I think, is what started to give me clients, the first few clients. And then once you start getting your first few clients, you start having work in your portfolio, which is actually for a brief that exists in the world and is not just a passion project. So that helps as well for people to know that, hey, this person works in the industry, has does know how to like work through a project and work with a client. So then you start to get in more. So yeah, I think that's how it began.
In the beginning, when you were starting when you were joining these networking events, you were very basically afraid of this. How did you overcome that fear? Because I know that there's a lot of people in the audience who share those similar anxieties. Are there any tips that you can give them, or any like actionable pieces of advice that they can walk away with to kind of increase their self-confidence in networking?
I cannot tell you the number of times that I I would look at a room full of people and not want to walk in, but knowing that this is something that I needed to do and wanted to get better at, that helps. Because if you don't want to do something innately, then you're not going to be able to take these steps. So I think, firstly, making up your mind that this is something that you actually want to do or want to get better, step one. And then, secondly, um, I think it never gets easy walking into a room where you don't know anyone. It would never get easy. But I think what would get easier is knowing that there is no wrong way of doing this. You cannot go wrong in going saying hi to someone. What is the worst that can happen? That you do not end up talking a lot and you could move on to another person then. Probably you couldn't strike up a vibe with this first person or the second person. And the worst case scenario is that you don't like the party and you leave. But it it can't really get so bad that you that the world comes down. I think there's more positives to this than negatives, because you might just meet someone who would refer you to some place where they know somebody's looking for a designer or an illustrator. You might just find someone who is hiring. You never know. So I think there's always positives, rather than a lot of negatives to these situations.
Do you remember the name of that daily event in London that you mentioned?
So it was not a daily event, but in the sense that there is something that's happening every now and then. There's creative mornings, which happens in all the major cities. There is ladies' wine design, which happens in most of the major cities. And then there are a lot of these local creative networks in whichever city people are located that would do events on the regular. So even if it's not like a big name like Creative Mornings or Ladies Wine Design, there would be something smaller that's happening. People do these small events where there would be a couple of speakers who would come in, and you could meet people from a variety of different backgrounds there. You could meet like a photographer or an art director. So it's not important that you all, as an illustrator, that I go and meet only illustrators. That's not going to be beneficial in the long run. You could make friends with illustrators, but that's a different intent.
So you mentioned that. So Creative Mornings I've heard of, but the other one you mentioned is was it Ladies Who Design?
Ladies wine design. Wine and design. Yeah, there's no wine involved, by the way. It's just called ladies wine design.
Ladies Wine Design.
Yeah, this was started by Jessica Heish. Um, she was a part of Sagmeister and Walsh. Sorry, Jessica Walsh is the one who started it. She's now in New York, and there is a New York chapter. There's London chapters. There's chapters in all major cities.
Do you have a creative routine now or rituals that help keep you grounded, especially when you have like tight deadlines coming up?
Right. With tight deadlines, honestly, I don't think any rituals would even like have a chance. There's only drawing and getting done with your deadline when there's a deadline. But when there's not an urgent deadline, there are these longer projects that kind of take months, which are like book projects and gifting projects, which take like a long time to finish. And these could like kind of drag on in the end because they go through a lot of revisions. And I think in such kind of projects, or maybe when people don't have projects, it feels really good to have a ritual or a grounding exercise which could get you in the mood or the zone. Um, for me, I love to meditate in the morning. Sometimes when I'm not in the zone to meditate, I love to listen to some music or like just sit on the floor with like a bunch of either my tarot or my notebooks, and I would just like to like doodle and draw and just sketch. Nothing crazy, nothing that would be like has to be like top notch star quality. It's just having fun. And I think music really helps me get into the zone whenever I want to like feel free.
what are your go-to musical selections this week?
Oh, that's interesting. I was just listening to Cesar right before the call. Um, Musical selections. That's interesting. I listen to a lot of electronic music, but not in the sense of really loud electronic, really like vibey electronic music.
I'm the same way. I like to put on house music to kind of like
Yeah,
have that consistent beat in the background, right? It just keeps you motivated.
yeah. Yeah, just a few weeks ago, I was in Brighton to listen to see Bonobo. Have you heard of Bonobo?
Yes, I think I have.
They were so good. So yeah, that's the sort of music that I really like listening to, which doesn't have a lot of vocals, but like good vibes, and I can draw.
Nice. This question came earlier from Madison, who asks, "What art apps would you recommend to those who are just beginning or interested in art?"
Ooh, if you're just beginning, I would recommend like a free app. Don't even have to spend much. I think Adobe Fresco is free. If you have an iPad. I started drawing on Photoshop, to be honest. I did not have an iPad when I began doing digital work. So I had this really tiny drawing tablet. I think it was an old Cintiq tablet. What was it called? Like a pen, something pen. I don't know. It didn't even have a screen, and it was like a 6-inch tablet. It was what I could afford at the time. So I used that, and I had a Photoshop subscription. And I think I started making really bad art on it. I would love, if I have any of those, I would love to drop it in, but I don't think I can find something from 2016 right now. But that is how I started drawing. I would take a picture of my sketch from the sketchbook. I would airdrop it to my MacBook. I would open it up on Photoshop and I would draw over it with whatever brush. I think it was the Kyle T. Webster brush back then, which comes preloaded in Photoshop. And that's where I started drawing. But definitely look for free stuff if you don't have the money to get subscriptions. Adobe Fresco's free. I haven't used anything else, honestly, on my iPad. So yeah, that's a good way to start.
When you feel stuck or uninspired, I mean, you mentioned music as kind of a way to kind of, get the creative juices flowing, but how do you get how do you go about getting started on a new project? And on the flip side, what do you do when burnout actually hits and the things you love start to feel like, well, like work?
Firstly, music is a big one. And sometimes when I don't feel it extremely with music, I go crazy dancing in my living room. Nobody has to be there for this, by the way. Nobody can be around me. I will lock myself in a room, play the loudest music that gets me in the zone, and I would just dance around for like 2 songs. And after that, I would feel really good. I would be like, yeah, my day is amazing. Everything's gonna be okay. And now I can draw. I think that's one of my ways to like really get my juices flowing if music is not doing it alone. It has to be dance and music. Um, that for like a regular drawing session. But when it comes to deadlines, I think my process is a bit different. When there's a brief that comes in, I would usually just sit in with the brief and take notes on all of these words that stand out in the brief. Say they're talking about, there was this brief that's just coming to my mind right now, which was talking about living funerals, which was so eclectic. I think that's why I'm thinking of this right now. But they wanted me to illustrate the funeral of a person who's still living. And they didn't want this topic to be a dark outlook on life. They wanted this to be a happy outlook on funerals. So I would take down all the important words in the brief that they have, and the art director has specified. and then, words related to the important words and how I could visually portray those words, and then start doing little doodles with those words. And then in the end, I would sit and try to combine these into ideas and concept sketches. So I think there is this set of steps that I do for briefs, which I don't do for like personal sketches. I would not mind map for personal sketches, but I would do that for client brief.
When I'm looking at your pieces, there's a lot of very interesting visuals. You've no doubt created your own voice through what you're creating here. But what I see in a lot of your work is some real, dare I say it, some metaphysical concepts here. When you're creating your pieces, do you feel like you're kind of like downloading these ideas from like the ether? Or, like how do these ideas come to you? Because like I know a lot of creatives that sometimes they don't feel like they're actually producing the work for themselves. They feel like they're like channeling the work, channeling that energy. And I know that kind of gets into little, these metaphysical concepts, but I kind of see that in your work. Is that a fair assessment there, or do you have another way of where you pull these ideas from?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that's how it is with my personal work, at least. Um, Not a lot with client briefs because I don't think a client brief would want me to meditate upon a concept. But when it comes to my own work, I think sometimes it's just the music. When I close my eyes, I would see a visual that supports the music just there. It just flows in, and I would draw that. And a lot of times, if it's not music, it's maybe I meditate. I think a lot about life. I think a lot about existence and creation and all the metaphysical and all the high level um, things in the world about creation. So whenever I delve on these concepts and I meditate upon them, I do get sort of visual downloads. I write a lot of journals. I have like stacks of my meditation journals, and my sketch journals are different, but then I write a lot. And sometimes I do a little bit of doodling when I'm writing on these journals, and they become a lot of my illustrations as well. So, yeah, that's how it goes for my personal.
Um, because I'm really interested in this subject. I'm gonna ask this question. And when you're in that meditative state, when you're kind of channeling these things, have you ever had any like really bizarre supernatural experiences?
I have gotten answers to a lot of things instantly, which I wouldn't have by myself. Like, if I just sat with myself and asked myself this question, Sneha wouldn't have known an answer to this. But when I would meditate on it, I would feel like I get an answer which is not from me. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm. Absolutely.
Does it make sense? Yeah. I don't think it makes sense to a lot of people. They're like, oh, it's just you. And I'm like, no, it doesn't feel like it's me, but I got an answer to this. So whatever works. But yeah, I don't think it's supernatural, but I feel like, yeah, it's like a download or a channeling of whatever I would want to know.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. Just how many creatives have these experiences. It's almost like, when you consider the idea of time, right? It's like I wonder, again, this is just hypothetical, but I wonder if like the future you somehow becomes aware of the present you and is feeding you that information, or if it's maybe you're just pulling from like a collective consciousness in some esoteric way. I don't know. It's just all speculation, hypothetical, but we could go down a huge rabbit hole with that.
That is cool. Oh yeah, that's such a big rabbit hole. But I've done a lot of past self meditations, like gone into a past situation and mended it and healed those and then come back to the current within my meditation. So they've been really cool. Like it just feels like, oh, that event which has been bothering me doesn't exist anymore. So I've done it with the past self, but I've never tapped into the future self situation. Yeah, so that's cool.
This is great. Professor Cannon in the chat just typed in, it's weird. Sometimes when I'm designing, I don't feel it's me. I'm just the channel to deliver these designs out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's sort of the feeling when I think of a concept and I get the visuals. I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm getting. This is this is what's there around me. So that's what's going on my paper right now. Yeah.
Amazing stuff. I can just see a client looking at your line list for billing and they see meditation and they're like, what the heck is that? No, but I think
Definitely not going in there.
yeah. I think many artists and designers listening right now can relate also when I say that we're also obsessive perfectionists. And we like to think of it as a gift, but it can also be a hindrance, especially to our workflow and to those, well, unfortunate souls who join us along for the ride. But how do you personally balance between perfection and obsession and still get the work out the door without driving yourself crazy?
Oh my God. I'm a recovering perfectionist, if that's if I think it's one of the biggest hurdles that I had to overcome in my life was perfection. And I'm calling it a hurdle. A lot of people like to say, hey, I'm a perfectionist. This is how, yeah, it is. It's nice to be a little bit of a perfectionist, but it could hinder your progress in the long run. At least it did for me. I would just like second guess everything that I was doing because I thought that it wasn't good enough. I was like, yeah, this is good, but it could be better. Yeah, it could be better for future Sneha, but this is Sneha in the current, and this is where my skills are taking me. But I wish I could tell this to myself back then, where I was not taking proper steps. Like, just like outreach. And I would avoid outreach because I was like, I could do better than this. Maybe my next couple of illustrations would be better, and I would do an outreach after that. And I think that is not good. That's absolutely not good. You should be ready with whatever you are at the minute, and if you're happy with it at the minute, just go ahead. And I think with perfection, what I was essentially doing was like comparing my step 3 to somebody else's step 9 or step 10. They were much ahead in the game. So when comparison kicks in with social media and everything, that's when the perfection actually get heightens, which is not a good place to be in.
Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. Comparison, imposter syndrome. They're the worst. And like you mentioned, social
Yeah.
media. But how do you handle it when you see others, maybe even your peers, like constantly sharing and maybe even oversharing their highlights and accolades?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the past it used to bother me and affect me, and I think I went off of Instagram um, for a while. I think the last couple of years I barely posted on Instagram because it was just like affecting me. It's like, oh, I can't churn out content. I'm not a content creator. It takes me time to create stuff that I genuinely want to create. And it started to become this sort of a space where people were creating for just the algorithm. And that was not me. And because it was bringing me to a place that I was like, oh, I got to draw to post. I was not liking what I was drawing to post. It was not genuinely me. It was not coming from a place of I want to make it. I was making it for the algorithm, and I was not enjoying that at all. So I kind of went off of it. Like not completely off of it. I would just like post a little bit of work, but I wouldn't go online so much. But eventually, I decided that if I want to scroll on social media, it has to be from my private account, which will have no part of design or illustration. It was just junk. I think I've said it in one other session on Adobe, but it is like a private account, which is like dogs, little cute puppies, and maybe food, and just all the junk that I want to consume if I want to scroll. But it cannot be on my design account where things would like bring up insecurities within me. I would just go on there and maybe just hype my friends up right now. 2025, all I go there to do is like hype my friends up who are doing cool work and post my work. That's all I go there for now. I think this is a good way for me to like strike a balance um, for being online, being on social media, which is kind of a requirement right now. You kind of have to show your work to get work. So yeah, this is my kind of a balance, I guess.
Yeah, and on that note, a lot of creatives still find self-promotion uncomfortable, even loathing it to the point of not doing any whatsoever. But like you mentioned, we have to promote ourselves because if we don't, who's going to do it for us? So, how do you personally approach and how do you promote your work, even like outside of social media?
Outside of social media, wow, I guess it's just cold outreach then outside of social media. I think for some people, it might help if they are doing maybe art shows and exhibits and like take part in local exhibits, which are a cool way to show your work. But I think commercially, that's a little less viable for designers. I mean, there's not a lot of places which designers can participate in exhibits. Maybe artists could, and sometimes illustrators could. But for like designers, it's a bit, you can't really participate in that way. I think apart from online, being online, going to networking events and cold outreach is the best way to do showing your work. Sorry.
Have you ever had the opportunity to get your work featured in like a gallery exhibit?
No, I haven't. As I was speaking about this, I was thinking, oh yeah, I haven't done that. I've participated in group shows here and there, but they've just been like one of my artworks, which I haven't done on a particular theme. It was just one of my artworks that I've done in a couple, maybe two or three exhibits, group exhibits, but they haven't been particularly for a gallery. No.
How do you go about like connecting with people to kind of set that up? Do you set it up yourself, or how does that work with just like the exhibits?
Oh, for the ones that I've done, I was approached for it. So, and a lot of times there are open calls for group exhibits, but I think for a personal exhibit, things would be very different. I haven't done that, so I don't think I would be the right person for it, but I think it would be different for a single person exhibit or a show.
Going back to social media, as much as I hate to, there's so much talk about showing up authentically online. And I know you and I have briefly discussed this, and you said that you don't necessarily buy into that narrative. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I remember us chatting a little about this. When I think of showing up authentically online, what comes to my mind is, the people giving tips and advices, just like, oh, you should have a niche or have a personal brand. I think this is somewhere which fits into that sort of a tip. Oh, you should show up authentically online. And I kind of don't believe in it because I think there's a gray area. I don't I don't personally think that somebody could show up 100% authentically online. You might be following someone for their tips and their advice. You would be following another person for their art content, like, oh, they draw amazingly. You might be following somebody else for another different purpose, maybe gardening. But do you know how these people are in person? Do you know how they are with their friends and neighbors? Do you know what they like eating? Do you know do you know like where they go to hang out? We don't know everything about these people, so they've decided to show up a certain part of their lives that feels authentic to them. So when people say show up 100% authentically, I don't think we can bring in all of ourselves online. I think we can decide what part of us we want to show online, and then use that to push forward in front of the world, because there is no way we could show all aspects of ourselves online and be sane at the same time. um I mean, there are vloggers, of course, but that's also a part of their lives. You're not seeing everything about them. We don't know exactly who they are, but that's okay. They've decided that they want to show that bit of themselves, and that's perfectly fine. But I feel like when people listen to this tip of showing up authentically online, what initially happened with me also, I was like, oh, what's authentically me? Um, That question I would answer through my art. For me, what I want to show up authentically in my art are little bits of myself. Probably one day I want to show my culture through my art. One day I want to show what I'm into, like, oh, this music that I'm really into made me draw this today. So I think people could decide what their authentic selves is at the moment, and that could be a little part of themselves. And I think there's a gray area, basically, is what I mean when people want to show up authentically online.
Now, if you are new to the Adobe Creative Career Discord, I'd like to take a moment to share one of the coolest things we're working on right now, and that would be the Adobe Creative Apprenticeship Program. This program connects aspiring creative people like you with top creative companies providing the actual training and experience that you need, which also looks amazing on a resume. Think of it like the ultimate internship meets mentorship opportunity. But wait, that's not all. You see, there is another aspect to the program, and it's called commissioned projects. This is where you can get even more experience working on an actual paid project with Adobe. Yes, that's right, Adobe as your first client. Seriously. The details on the Creative Apprenticeship Program, the commissioned projects, and more incredible career resources can all be found at behance.net/resources. That's behance.net/resources. Since we only have a few more minutes tonight with our wonderful guest, Sneha Shanker, if you do have a question, please post it in the chat. Or if you're shy, ask her directly following the show. But let's get into your YouTube, all right? Because you started experimenting with YouTube as another outlet for your voice. What inspired you to move into that space? And what do you hope to share there?
Yeah. Honestly, this happened last year when I felt like I wasn't able to completely show up with only my art. I felt like I had more to say. And I thought that long form content would be fun. Little did I know that it takes a lot of time to produce long form content. So there's only a few videos on my YouTube, but I'm gonna get back to it this year and produce more.
How many videos do you have up there as of now?
I think I think four probably, and that's all from last year.
Nice, nice. And are there any like tutorials for like, new artists that kind of follow, or are there like any what can we expect when we visit your YouTube page?
So I want to talk more about the nitty-gritties of the industry. I want to talk about what it is like to do the business of art, and a lot of people don't understand what happens behind the scenes. How do you work with a client? What are contracts? What do you what's for example, what's a kill fee? A lot of people don't know all of this, and they have to go through the process of finding it the hard way. Um, to learn from their mistakes. And I kind of want to bridge that gap. And I want to make content which could help people in the journey of becoming professionals in the industry. So I want to make content about that. And then I also want to talk a little bit about my life and what I enjoy doing.
I love this direction that you're taking the YouTube channel in because, when you go to design school, you can pick up skills. They can teach you how to use the software. You can listen and watch a million different YouTube tutorials, but learning about, like you said, the business of art, the stuff that they don't really teach you in schools, that you only learn through hands-on experience and real world projects. This is valuable information, audience. And that's what we strive to do here in the Adobe Creative Career Discord is to provide that additional information that you're not going to find anywhere else except here. This question comes in, this one came in earlier again from Madison, who asks, do you ever look for inspiration online? And if so, how do you make your own ideas out of it without copying your inspiration?
Oh yeah, that's a really cool question. Thank you, Madison. Um, as I mentioned, I think early on when I said that I put like a completely like a cap creator's cap on, and I went into the zone of who is Sneha, because I wanted to create from a place that genuinely felt like me. And I figured out what are the things that I actually enjoy in life, and that gives me that little bit of an exciting kick when I see them. And I wanted to translate that within my, and from them is where I pull my inspiration. Sometimes, I would go on a walk and see some cool colors and snap a picture, and like that would be like the color combinations that I would be using. But other than that, I think I have the set of a set of inspirational, mm, how do I say, verticals, maybe very business kind of a term, but like these things that constantly give me inspiration. One of them being like my culture. Even the colors that I use are really bright. I use like a lot of animals in my work, and like foliage and flora. So a lot of these are repetitive elements in my work that I've found over time that I enjoy making, or I enjoy looking at. And when it comes to inspiration, I would probably look at pictures of these things rather than art, which is already done about these things. So if you look, I find that if you look at art, say for example, I want to draw a butterfly. Now, if I look at a picture of a butterfly, there could be innumerable ways of drawing a butterfly. Versus if I look at an illustration of a butterfly, I would directly translate what I'm seeing back in my work. And I don't want that. I don't want anybody else's work to influence my work, which is why I would look at either pictures, photographers' work, a lot of vintage stuff. I love looking at vintage ephemera, um, old collectibles. That sort of is like my vibe. And what happens with places like Pinterest is that it's like an echo chamber, so you would end up making art about the same stuff that exists. So Pinterest is good in some ways, but not when you want inspiration. Do you know what I mean? Like, not when you want to create something that doesn't exist. Well, every art in some way, some people would, debate that it's derivative of what already exists. It's true in some sense, but I think I would like to think otherwise, that I'm coming up with things myself, which is inherently me, and it doesn't exist online at the moment.
What kinds of stories or themes are you most excited to explore in future work that maybe you haven't tapped into yet?
Yeah, honestly, I've been wanting to. Yeah, I have an answer immediately because I've been thinking about this. I want to do like a series of books on metaphysical concepts. Like, I want to do like astral projection, lucid dreaming, and things of the sort. I can't think of a lot of them, but awakening. I want to do like a series, which would look so cool together.
When you're ready for that, please reach out to me because this is to those who may not be familiar with some of my work that I do outside of the creative community. Um, I'm involved a lot in that subject of the unexplained, as we'll leave it. If you can kind of again tap into that safely, there's a lot of dangers with that. Just putting a disclaimer out there, but that's another conversation for another another time, as you well know, right?
True.
Um, all right, let's get into again future things because I think it's also important as a creative to kind of think, beyond what you're doing now in the present, but where the industry is headed in the future, especially as we begin to navigate, through what's on everyone's mind at the moment, the opportunities and the challenges of AI.
I think this has been a big conversation this year with a lot of my fellow illustrator friends. And one thing that is common is the threat. Like everyone's feeling it. And I would say that there are some industries within illustration that could really go under if with AI developing at the rate that it is. But I don't think it's going to be everything. And I also feel like personally that there would be a point that AI images would get so saturated and we would be so tired of seeing it that we would be like, hey, let me see a human made content. This is right now, if you go onto your YouTube or any other social media channel, you would be immediately able to make out what is an AI generated thumbnail or an AI generated art. It's really easy to tell, but that's now. And it kind of you would feel like you've seen it enough that human art would be what stands out in between AI content. And I think it would take a few years for us to reach there, realistically speaking. But I think it's not all bad. Like currently, the industry is doing not so great as well as it did last year until last year. But I think in the future, it's going to get much better. And I think the industry would come back stronger.
Going to, the Adobe products and the Adobe Creative Suite, what are some of the tips, tricks, and workflows that might be some of your favorite or some of your like go-tos that you can kind of share with the audience?
With Adobe products, what's been happening off late is that I'm loving mixing in a little bit of vectors, and my work is usually raster. So I mainly work on Photoshop. But because I like adding in vectors, I kind of bounce between Illustrator and Photoshop. And I think Adobe Fresco is kind of bridging the gap. I don't have to bounce between the two, and I could just like work on one app where everything's in there together. And I could also animate. There is some really easy ways to animate on Fresco, which I recently discovered, which is why I'm like so excited when I'm talking about it. I could always frame by frame animate. That was not new for me, but there are these little plug-in kind of simple animation movements on Fresco, which I recently discovered. And I was like, what? I can do this. I love it because I don't use After Effects. So that was one interesting turn that my work is going to take because of that additional feature on Fresco. Apart from that, tips and tricks, I don't have anything unique to be honest within tips and tricks. I just have my workflow. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know sometimes, that workflow is unique to each individual. You got to find something that works for you. But I
Yeah.
guess the most important thing, and I know a lot of artists struggle with this, is staying organized, right? With like your file structure, your layers. Are you one of those people that
Gosh.
did I just catch you at that moment? Like where you
No,
have
I
like
thought
a
of I thought of everything else organization and not my artworks. It's very organized, by the way. I'm a very organized creator. I have everything in groups, everything in sections, everything's named. There is no layer 221. It's always named.
to those of you who are just starting out in the creative industry, once you touch someone else's file, you'll realize how important file organization and layer structure is because you never know when you're going to have to hand off that file to somebody else. And you don't want them spending hours trying to decipher your project or need a Rosetta Stone to translate what the heck is going on here. So I love that, Sneha, that you are organized.
And also, like, sometimes you got to make edits on a file from a year ago because
Yeah.
the client probably could come back and be like, hey, could you give us this, but now for my marketing team? And sometimes going into your own projects, you could forget what you did. It's been a year that you haven't touched it. So, yeah, you don't want to decipher a Rosetta Stone, like Justin said. If you name every layer, you would know what's where. That rhymes.
Absolutely, because the last thing you want to do, especially in a tight time, a tight deadline, right, is, oh, what is this? Layer one, copy, copy, copy.
Exactly.
What's the weirdest or most unexpected thing you've ever been asked to create?
I actually can't think of any. Maybe dead people.
That one project you were mentioning, that you're working on now, like a
Yeah.
funeral for someone who's living, like that's pretty unusual.
It is. That's one of, I thought I've already mentioned it, so I didn't want to mention it again. But the second illustration from the same project, I kind of drew a lot of dead people floating in the air, like they're going to their afterlife. So I thought that was a bit weird, but I liked drawing it. Yeah.
Hey, that's all right. To work in this field, to be successful in this field, you have to be a little weird. And I guess for us weirdos out there, it's just normal. There's
Yes.
nothing unusual about what we do, and we like to have fun
Yeah.
with it. We are out of time, but again, I just want to thank my guest, Sneha Shanker, for joining us tonight to discuss her incredible career journey. Be sure to connect with Sneha on LinkedIn, visit her website, snehashanker.com. And if you enjoyed this program, catch all the latest updates for the next Spotlight sessions and all the great content we have here in the Adobe Creative Career Discord by following the upcoming events calendar at the top of the server so you can see what's coming next. I also want to thank my new producer, Catherine Chu, Lisa Temple, live moderator, Elizabeth, and the entire Adobe crew for sponsoring this program and helping to bring it alive. And thank you, Discord community, and everyone who tuned in to listen to me, your host, Justin Bamforth, aka JBam. You can always catch me on Discord, LinkedIn, or my website, justinbamforth.com. Until next time, everyone, take care.
Thank you so much for having me, Justin. It was wonderful chatting with you.
For more conversations with creative professionals, subscribe to the Spotlight Sessions podcast or check out the Adobe Creative Career Discord. Links are posted in the show notes.